There are moments in life when a single phone call quietly destroys everything you believe to be true. Mine came exactly 1 month after my oldest daughter walked down the aisle, wearing the brightest smile I had ever seen. I answered that call expecting a routine question from a wedding vendor. Instead, I heard words that made my blood run cold. The photographer lowered her voice and said, "Mr. Carter, I found something in your daughter's wedding photos. You need to come see me immediately. Come alone. And whatever you do, do not tell your daughter. I wish I could tell you I ignored her. I wish I had laughed it off as some strange misunderstanding." But deep inside, something shifted the moment I heard the fear in her voice. That one conversation uncovered a betrayal so calculated that it shattered my family and forced me to make the hardest decision of my life. Looking back now, I realized the warning signs had been there all along. I was simply too busy being a father to notice that the people I loved most had stopped seeing me as family and started seeing me as an opportunity. My name is Daniel Carter. I spent over 4 decades building my business from the ground up. What began as a tiny neighborhood hardware store eventually became 3 successful locations across Arizona. I worked weekends, skipped vacations, and sacrificed more nights than I could count because I wanted my family to have a life better than the one I grew up with. Every early morning and every late night felt worth it whenever I saw my daughters smiling. I believed that was what success looked like. My wife passed away several years before all of this happened, leaving me to navigate life as both father and mother. It was the hardest chapter of my life, but my daughters gave me purpose. I promised myself that no matter what happened, they would never feel alone. I kept every promise I made to them, even when keeping those promises meant ignoring my own needs. Looking back, maybe I confused unconditional love with unlimited sacrifice. I never imagined the difference would someday cost me almost everything. My oldest daughter, Emily, had always been the ambitious one. She was polished, intelligent, and knew exactly how to make people like her. She climbed the corporate ladder quickly, surrounded herself with successful friends, and always carried herself with confidence. When she introduced me to her fiancé, Ryan Mitchell, I honestly believed she had found the perfect man. He was charming, well-dressed, financially successful, and said all the right things. Every father hopes his daughter finds someone who will protect her. Ryan convinced me he was that man. My younger daughter, Olivia, lived a very different life. After her divorce, she asked if she could stay in my guest house for a little while until she got back on her feet. I did not hesitate for even a second. A few weeks became a few months. Then months quietly turned into years. Somewhere along the way, her boyfriend, Kyle, moved in too. Neither of them paid rent. Neither contributed to the household. Somehow every conversation eventually ended with another request for money. Every time I thought about saying no, I reminded myself they were family. 1 month before that phone call, I gave Emily the wedding she had always dreamed about. The ceremony took place at one of the most beautiful resorts in Arizona. Flowers covered every walkway. Live musicians filled the air with music. The reception looked like something from a luxury magazine. I spent nearly $70,000 making sure every detail was perfect, because I wanted my daughter to remember that day for the rest of her life. Watching her smile as she walked toward the altar made every dollar feel worthwhile. When the music faded and the guests went home, I believed I had fulfilled one of the greatest responsibilities a father could ever have. I remember standing alone after everyone left, looking around the empty ballroom. The candles were still burning. Half-filled glasses remained on the tables. Staff members quietly cleaned the room while I stood there feeling grateful. I honestly believed life was entering a peaceful chapter. I had no idea that everything I had just celebrated was built on a foundation of lies. Exactly 1 month later, I was sitting in my home office on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Financial reports covered my desk, while sunlight poured through the windows. Business was doing well, and for the first time in years I allowed myself to enjoy the quiet. My coffee was still hot when my phone buzzed with a number I did not recognize. Normally I ignored unknown calls, but something convinced me to answer. "Hello, this is Daniel." There was a long pause before a nervous female voice finally spoke. "Mr. Carter, this is Caroline Brooks. I was the photographer at your daughter Emily's wedding." I immediately smiled. Of course. The pictures were beautiful. "Is everything all right?" She did not answer right away. Instead, I heard her take a slow breath. Sir, I need to meet with you as soon as possible. Please come alone. And please, do not tell your daughter about this conversation. My smile disappeared instantly. I slowly stood from my chair. What happened? Another long silence filled the line before she whispered words I will never forget. While editing the wedding photographs, I discovered something I was never supposed to see. A chill crawled across my arms. What do you mean? I cannot explain it over the phone. You need to come to my studio tomorrow morning. I promise everything will make sense once I show you the photographs. My heart pounded harder with every second. Are you saying someone got hurt? No, was there an accident? No, then what is this about? Her voice cracked as she answered, It is much worse than an accident. Before I could ask another question, I heard Olivia yelling from the kitchen, Dad, are you listening to me or not? I covered the phone with my hand. Just a second. She marched into my office, holding her car keys with an irritated expression. My Honda is embarrassing. Melissa just bought a brand new luxury SUV. I cannot keep driving that old thing. You promised we would look at dealerships this week. Normally I would have responded immediately, but my mind was somewhere else. Not now, Olivia. Her eyebrows narrowed. What do you mean, not now? We will talk later. Later is always your answer. Behind her, Kyle wandered into the hallway carrying a soda like he owned the place. Happy wife, happy life, right, Dan? Just help her out. It is only a car, only a car. The words echoed inside my head while I looked around my own house. My daughter wanted a new vehicle. Her unemployed boyfriend thought he had the right to tell me how to spend my money, and somewhere across the city, a frightened photographer was waiting to show me something so serious that she refused to discuss it over the phone. For the first time in years, my peaceful home no longer felt peaceful. It felt like the calm before a storm. The next morning, I left my house before sunrise, but I could not leave the weight sitting on my chest. Every mile I drove felt heavier than the last. The city was already waking up around me. Cars filled the streets. People hurried toward another ordinary workday, and coffee shops buzzed with conversations that suddenly seemed meaningless. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they ever had before. I kept replaying Caroline's trembling voice in my mind. She had photographed hundreds of weddings during her career, so whatever had frightened her enough to call me in secret had to be far beyond an ordinary mistake. For the first time in decades, I found myself hoping that someone had simply made a technical error, because every other possibility felt impossible to accept. Her photography studio occupied a renovated brick building tucked between several art galleries downtown. The large front windows displayed beautiful wedding portraits, filled with smiling couples, joyful families, and children laughing beneath summer sunlight. Looking at those photographs almost convinced me that life was still simple. They represented promises, hope, and new beginnings. Yet as soon as I stepped inside, I noticed Caroline standing near the reception desk with a nervous expression that immediately erased every comforting thought. She tried to smile when she saw me, but the fear in her eyes made it clear that nothing about this meeting would end well. Without saying much, she locked the front door behind me and guided me through a narrow hallway into a private editing room. The walls were covered with computer monitors, framed photographs, and expensive camera equipment. Normally, the room probably felt creative and peaceful, but that morning it resembled an interrogation room. Every sound echoed in the silence. Even the faint hum of the computers seemed unusually loud. Caroline offered me coffee, but I shook my head. My mouth had already gone dry. I did not need coffee. I needed answers. She sat down at her editing station, but kept both hands resting on the desk for several seconds without touching the keyboard. It looked as though she was trying to gather enough courage to continue. Finally, she looked directly at me and spoke quietly. I almost deleted these photographs. The sentence caught me completely off guard. What do you mean? She lowered her eyes. Because sometimes the truth ruins people. I kept asking myself whether it was my place to interfere. But if I were sitting where you are now, I would want someone to tell me. My heartbeat grew louder. Please, just show me. She slowly opened a folder labeled Wedding Originals. Hundreds of beautiful images appeared across the screen. There was Emily smiling while getting ready with her bridesmaids, Ryan adjusting his tie inside the groom's suite, guests arriving beneath bright Arizona sunshine. Everything looked exactly the way I remembered it. Every photograph captured happiness so perfectly that it almost made me question why I'd even come. Caroline quietly clicked another folder. This one is different. My eyes stayed locked on the monitor. She explained that she always arrived several hours before every wedding to test lighting conditions, camera settings, and different shooting angles. Most photographers ignored those practice shots because they were never intended for clients. They simply helped prepare for the ceremony. Then the first image appeared. At first, my brain refused to understand what I was seeing. Ryan stood on an outdoor terrace wearing his wedding tuxedo. His jacket hung loosely over one shoulder, as though he had rushed outside for privacy. Standing directly in front of him was a woman I had never seen before. She had long auburn hair flowing over a dark green dress, and both of them were standing impossibly close together. My breathing stopped. Caroline remained silent while opening the next image. The woman wrapped both arms around Ryan's neck. The next frame showed him pulling her even closer. The image after that removed every possible excuse. They were kissing. Not a friendly goodbye. Not an awkward misunderstanding. Not an accidental moment frozen at the wrong angle. It was intimate, passionate, comfortable. The kind of kiss shared between two people who clearly belonged together. My legs suddenly felt weak. Enough that I grabbed the back of a nearby chair before collapsing onto it. Though the word escaped my mouth almost as a whisper. There has to be another explanation. Caroline quietly opened the image information beside the photograph. Every detail appeared on the screen. Time, date, GPS coordinates, camera serial number. Everything proved the same horrifying fact. The photographs had been taken exactly 1 hour and 56 minutes before my daughter walked down the aisle. I stared at the numbers until they became blurry. Ryan had kissed another woman less than 2 hours before, promising to love my daughter forever. The room became completely silent. I could barely hear my own breathing. Caroline slowly opened several more photographs. Each one only made things worse. They laughed together. They held hands. Ryan rested his forehead against hers, while smiling in a way I had never even seen him smile around Emily. There was no guilt, no hesitation, only confidence, like a man who believed nobody would ever discover what he was doing. Then something else caught my attention. The woman wore a wedding ring. I leaned closer toward the monitor. "Are you sure these photographs haven't been edited?" Caroline immediately shook her head. "Absolutely not." She opened another technical window filled with digital information that I barely understood. Every original file contains encrypted data generated inside the camera. It records the exact second the picture is taken. That information cannot be changed without leaving evidence. I checked everything 3 different times because I honestly hoped I had made some terrible mistake. She looked directly into my eyes. I didn't. A cold wave spread through my entire body. I realized this wasn't simply about cheating. This had been deliberate. Ryan had looked my daughter in the eyes, taken wedding vows, accepted thousands of dollars in gifts, smiled for every family photograph, all while another woman was waiting for him outside. My stomach twisted so hard I thought I might become sick. Why? The question escaped before I even realized I had spoken. If he loved someone else, why marry Emily at all? Caroline looked away. I wish I knew. She reached into her desk drawer and placed a small flash drive on the table between us. Everything is here. Every original photograph, every backup, every timestamp, every technical report. I made several copies because I was afraid something might happen to the files. I picked up the flash drive. It felt impossibly small, yet somehow it weighed more than everything I had built during the last 40 years. As I slipped it into my pocket, I realized my life had just divided into 2 parts. The man who walked into this studio still believed his family was living a happy ending. The man walking out knew that someone had built that happiness on lies. And deep inside, a voice I had ignored for years quietly whispered something that terrified me even more. If Ryan could hide something this enormous, what else had everyone been hiding from me? The drive home should have taken less than 30 minutes, but it felt like the longest journey of my life. Every red light forced me to sit alone with thoughts I desperately wanted to escape. My fingers remained wrapped around the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The flash drive rested in my jacket pocket like a brick. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. If Ryan had been bold enough to betray Emily only hours before their wedding, what kind of man had I actually welcomed into my family? Every answer my mind created felt darker than the last. When I finally pulled into my driveway, everything looked exactly the same. The flowers near the front entrance still swayed gently in the warm breeze. The fountain continued pouring water into the stone basin, exactly as it had every morning for years. From the outside, nothing had changed. But I knew better. Sometimes the world stays perfectly still, while your entire life quietly collapses beneath your feet. Before I even reached the front door, I heard laughter coming from inside the house. Olivia and Kyle were sitting in my living room watching television, with the volume turned far louder than necessary. Empty takeout containers covered the coffee table, and several soda cans had been left on expensive furniture, without coasters. Kyle barely looked up when I walked in. "Hey Dan, did you remember those steaks I wanted for dinner?" His words barely registered. Olivia smiled without noticing my expression. "Dad, I found a dealership running a special promotion. If we go this weekend, we could get a great deal on a new SUV." I stood there quietly. For years I would have answered immediately. I would have apologized for forgetting. I would have promised to help. Instead, I simply looked around my own house, the television, the furniture, the decorations. Every single item had been purchased through decades of hard assay work. Yet the people enjoying those comforts acted as though they had earned them. Something inside me shifted. Not anger, not yet, something colder, something calmer. I walked past, both of them without saying a word, and entered my office. Closing. The door behind me felt strangely comforting. For the first time all day, silence surrounded me. I sat at my desk, removed the flash drive, and stared at it for several minutes before plugging it into my computer. The folder opened instantly. Hundreds of photographs appeared across the screen. I forced myself to look through every single image. Each one told the same horrifying story. Ryan had never looked nervous. He never appeared guilty. If anything, he looked relaxed, confident, like someone following a carefully planned schedule. The more I studied the pictures, the more one detail refused to leave my mind. The mysterious woman wore a wedding ring. That meant she was married too. This was not some last-minute mistake made by a man. Overwhelmed with wedding nerves, this looked like an ongoing relationship, a secret life. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. One terrible possibility suddenly entered my mind. What if Emily already knew? The thought made my stomach tighten. No father wants to believe his child would willingly ignore something like this, but people ignored painful truths every day. Love often blinded intelligent people. Still, something about the situation refused to make sense. If Ryan loved another woman, why continue with such an expensive wedding? Why stand before hundreds of guests? Why exchange vows? Why smile through every family photograph? There had to be another reason. Money. The word entered my mind so suddenly that I actually whispered it aloud. The wedding, the gifts, the checks, the cash. I remembered Emily insisting that guests avoid traditional presents. Cash is more practical. She had told everyone with a smile. At the time, I admired how practical she sounded. Now that conversation echoed differently inside my head. I opened the wedding budget, stored on my laptop. Nearly $70,000. Venued, flowers, music. Luxury. Catering. Designer, decorations, everything had been first class because I wanted my daughter to have memories that lasted forever. Then, another number surfaced in my memory. During the reception, several business friends had personally handed Ryan expensive envelopes. One longtime client had proudly announced he was giving the newlyweds $20,000 to help them begin married life. Others had written generous checks as well. I reached for a notepad and began writing every amount I could. Remember, the total climbed higher than I expected, far higher. When I finally added everything together, I realized the wedding had probably generated well over $100,000. dollars in gifts and financial support. Stared at the number for several moments. My heartbeat slowly increased. Was it possible? Had the wedding itself been part of a much larger plan? A knock interrupted my thoughts. Olivia stepped inside without waiting for permission. "Dad, you seem distracted lately. Is everything okay?" Normally I would have smiled. Instead, I looked directly into her eyes. "Tell me something," she frowned. "What? If someone married for money instead of love, would you consider that fraud?" She laughed awkwardly. "That is a weird question. Maybe depends on the situation." Then she quickly changed the subject. "Anyway, Kyle thinks investing in a small business would be a great opportunity for all of us. We only need about $50,000 to get started." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. My daughter had entered the room while I was trying to understand whether my oldest child had become the victim of a massive deception. Yet all Olivia could think about was asking me for another check. I quietly closed my notebook. "Not today." Her smile disappeared. "You always say that lately. What changed?" I held her gaze. Maybe I finally started paying attention. For just a second, something flashed across her face. Not sadness, not concern, uneasiness. She forced another smile before quietly leaving the room. After the door closed, I looked toward the family photograph sitting beside my tea desk. It had been taken years earlier, during a summer vacation. Everyone looked happy. Everyone looked genuine. I slowly turned the frame face down, because I no longer knew whether any of those smiles had ever been real. That night, sleep never came. Instead, I sat alone in my office watching the city lights through the window while one decision slowly formed. Inside my mind, I wasn't going to confront Ryan. Not yet. I wasn't going to tell Emily. Not until I understood everything. Because instinct told me I had uncovered only the first layer of a much larger secret. And somewhere, beneath that secret, someone believed I would never discover the truth. They were about to learn just how dangerous an underestimated father could become.